set you was to look at the long-term and short-term factors. So let me just load it up. There we are. So the factors that I gave you, I wanted you to put them into long-term and short-term. Now what I've done is I have split it up myself. The boxes in black font and the black font in italics is factors that I think are short-term, and the bits in red are long-term. So the first one that I have put it as a short-term factor because it's talking about the Great Depression, and actually that was kind of not at the start of the Weimar Republic, so it's a pretty short-term thing that whilst the Great Depression was happening, actually it's a short-term factor that affected the Weimar democracy. The second box I have put into red because it is talking about how the Germans actually, they didn't regard the Weimar Republic right from the beginning when it was created as a proper regime, and they don't really believe in the Republic. That's why I've said right from the very beginning it's a long-term factor. The third one, it is talking about actually what the Weimar Republic kind of inherited right at the start. So it's talking about how, obviously at the start, that is a regime that signed the Treaty of Versailles right at the end of World War One, and again when parts of Germany was invaded by the French in 1922. So it's this idea that the Weimar Republic, it's got this kind of, it's not only inherited this bad reputation, but it doesn't really help when parts of Germany get invaded by the French as well. So it's just kind of building on that. But again, I've said that's a long-term factor. Now this one, the fourth box along, I have said you could argue both ways. That's why it's in red and in italics as well. So I think it's talking about who actually kind of carried out the betrayal. Now I've said it's because of the elites that were kind of the elites from the pre-1918 period, the ones who have always had that power. Because of that reason, I've argued that actually you could use it as a short-term factor. However, if you wanted to argue it's I've just forgotten what I said. But the elites, because of who they were, that's why I've said it's a long-term factor. In terms of short-term, I've said because it's those elites, yes, it's the same people from pre-1918, but actually they're the ones that are carrying out the political betrayal. That is a very short-term thing. Now, the next one, let's scroll down, here we are. The Weimar Constitution itself, it's one of the most democratic in the world, but it does contain some loopholes. Now, that is again something that I've said is short term because the Weimar Constitution is obviously created at the start of the Weimar Republic only. And one of the kind of biggest loopholes that it has is Article 48, which gives the president most of the power. The next one I've put in red, therefore it's long term, and the fact that this republic, it's again kind of similar to what we talked about of what it's inherited. It's the fact that the republic was unable to kind of get rid of all these myths that they'd had right from the start, this stab in the back theory, and the accusation that actually the Kaiser and the army, they'd been betrayed by the bunch of November criminals, the November criminals being the people who signed the Treaty of Versailles and then went on to create the Weimar Republic. So something like that, because the Germans are still putting the blame on the Republic for something they did right at the start, I've said it's something that's a bit more long term. Right, the next one, I've put that in black, therefore I'm arguing it's short term. It's because all the kind of small governments that were created during the Weimar Republic, it's not really a single party having a majority government. It's actually small coalition governments that have been formed. So because of that reason, and this happens kind of throughout the Weimar Republic, for that reason I'm arguing it's a short-term problem. Now the very last two, I have argued they're both in red, so they're both long-term. First one, this one, where it talks about actually the Republic, they weren't able to kind of have a strong leader at all. And yes, you have Strassmann, but even then he wasn't really kind of a very strong Republican. He was still quite nationalist, and he wanted to kind of restore Germany to what it had been previously. than actually bothering to create a perfect or a secure democracy rather. And the last one, again, I've said that is long term because the Republic is still unable to, they're not able to sort their economy out. And the problem is that people compared the Weimar economy to what had been like pre-war. Now, obviously, pre-war levels, in terms of the economy, it was doing pretty well. But actually, you can't really compare post-war and pre-war. Well, you can, but the Germans basically expected the post-war economy to go back to pre-war economy very, very quickly. But it doesn't. And because of that, they have this image that under the Kaiser, everything is better, or was better, and that's therefore the Weimar Republic are doing a bad job, and it's their fault. So for that reason, I've said it's something long term. So it's this idea that the Germans, just kind of right from the very beginning, they're blaming the Weimar Republic for everything that happened during the war, the fact that they're not able to kind of go back to what it was like at the start of World War One and what it was like before. Right, the next task that I did ask you to do, I didn't ask you to submit this, it's a fact files. Now some of you have uploaded one or two of them, and that's absolutely fine. I've had to read through them, but I didn't expect you to upload them. I know the girls, you did the email to say if you could kind of create one and then share it amongst yourselves. That's fine, but please can we just double check that you've got a copy of each of the key figures that I asked you to look at. But apart from that, that's absolutely fine. Now I'm going to move on to task 6 and 7, which is what I asked you to do next and submit. So task 6, it was looking at the table on page 121 in the AQA book, looking at table 3, which was showing the election results of July and November 1932. So I've kind of just put some quick bullet points up for you up on the screen so it's a little bit easier. The first question I asked you to answer, well, do any of these results surprise you? So if you look at them throughout kind of July and November, actually the number of votes that the Nazi Party get are the largest compared to all of the other political parties. And that is a change because kind of between 1924 to 1928 and even in 1930 actually the Socialists have most of the votes. So for the first time we get to a point where actually the Nazi Party have more votes than the Socialists. The Socialists still have a high number, but just not as much as the Nazis. And again, the KPD have increased dramatically in terms of the number of votes we had. So we're seeing how the Germans are actually moving more towards radical parties as we go into July 1932. Now you can see the next question I asked you was, well, why does this happen? So part of the reason that in July 1932 the Nazi Party gets 230 deputies, that's because the Nazis managed to gain votes from the middle class and the farmers as well. So these are two groups that before the Nazi Party hadn't got votes from. But actually they do get them this time, therefore that's the reason they got a lot more votes in July 1932 even. But despite being still the largest party in terms of votes, in November 1932 actually the number of deputies reduces. So in July they got 230 deputies, but in November they got 196, so it has reduced. And the reason possibly that it was reduced is because Hitler refused to accept Papen's offer of being Vice-Chancellor. He wanted to be Chancellor, and possibly because he rejected this, it could have harmed his votes. But again, what we see is the KPD, actually, they increase in terms of the number of votes they get, and the Socialist Party, the SPD, again, they've reduced the number of votes they've got from July to November, but actually they're still pretty high up. So the top three parties are still the Nazis, the KPD party, and the Socialist Party. Okay. Right, task 7. So task 7, that was looking at the Ian Kershaw extract. And the reason I ask you to have a look at this and only answer in 1 or 2 sentences was because I wanted to see if you understood what the extract was saying and if you could summarise it very, very shortly, because that's what you're expected to do for your extract question, pretty much. And every single one that I read, you fully understood that extract, so that's really, really good. But the whole idea, or that Kershaw's trying to say, is that Brüning, he made a mistake calling those elections because he underestimated the Germans and how kind of angry they were. Now, because he's underestimated them, what you end up with getting is obviously the Nazi Party get a lot more votes because the Germans want somebody who's going to make a difference. Right, task 8. Oops, one sec. Task 8. Now, what I'm going to show you is, this is Dan's work. Well done, Dan. I thought what you submitted was absolutely fantastic, and you've gone through each of the key points. Now, Dan, you've done it as an essay. The rest of you didn't, and that's absolutely fine. But I just kind of want to go through the key points that you talked about in your essay, because it is exactly what I was looking for. So the question that I asked you to answer in a paragraph or two was, to what extent was the Weimar democracy officially dead by 1932? So, what Dan has done, he's initially argued to say that actually, the reasons that it was dead. So he talks about actually how Hindenburg, he exploited his power in the time leading up to 1932, and this is because he basically controlled all the chancellors, and he got rid of them when he lost any confidence in them. And you can see that actually democracy, that's not democracy. Hindenburg is basically controlling whatever, the chancellors, and he's basically making sure that they do what he wants them to. He also invoked Article 48 lots and lots of times, able to get what he wanted, and actually you're not having the Reichstag being able to vote and discuss the ideas. To the extent where between 1930 and 1932, you've only actually got 29 minor laws that are passed in the Reichstag compared to 109 emergency laws that are passed under the Article 48. Which again emphasises the fact that democracy is dead by this point. Dan also talks about how the president has got a very close circle of supporters around him that do constantly encourage him to basically keep power for himself and not be democratic. Right. He then goes on to talk about the fact that democracy was dead because of Papen's chancellorship. When he is appointed as chancellor, actually none of his cabinet members or himself are members of the Reichstag. And that's not democracy, because they didn't actually get a say in who the chancellor was, or the German people didn't, rather. And this is because, obviously, Papen, he did carry out the Prussian coup, and he's appointed himself as the Reich Commissioner there as well. And then, taking away democracy again even more. You could also talk about, what else has... Yeah, so he's talked about how there's almost a mini army being created to be able to control the people as well. However, Dan does do a paragraph to explain actually it wasn't all kind of doom and gloom, that there was still some democracy, because despite the fact that, there are chancellors in place and Hindenburg is basically controlling who comes in and out of power, actually there are some elections, and in these elections people are allowed to vote. And naturally, like we looked at, naturally we see in the election results that a lot of the Germans were voting for more radical parties because they want to see a difference. They want somebody who's going to be able to carry out what they say. And they do, and that's partly the reason why the Nazis get lots and lots of votes. So actually, in that sense, you could argue that it's not a complete democracy. You can even kind of go into the fact that, yes, that's just the election results. If you look at the presidential election results, Hindenburg and Hitler are both elected by the people, and they get the top number of votes between them.